So we're going to start off today talking a little bit about this notion of the journey to enterprise DevOps. But what I want to start with is, as Derek mentioned, we're really thrilled to have you here in Boston. This is the view of the Charles River. Are local people or out-of-towners? Local? Yeah. So, one of the things I love about this area, I'm from New England, I love the water, and this is something that is part of almost all of human history, right? Is this notion of bodies of water, right? That we find ourselves on one shore, there's another shore on the other side, and invariably the human urge is to get across it, right? So we're not satisfied to have this this body of water. We're standing on our shore and we know there's something worthwhile over there. And going back as long as humans have encountered bodies of water, we've thought, how can we get to the other side, right? So very earliest days, kind of crude, right? Where we can kind of put things on a raft, we can pack ourselves together, we can kind of ferry ourselves with a pole or a pulley, get across to the other side. This is a great photo from 1939 from during the Great Depression in Alabama as part of the Works Progress Administration, right? And of course, this kind of works, right? You can get everything on there, you got to get it across, you can get off, and then you can go back and do it again. Not always necessarily the most stable way to do this, but it worked. Unfortunately, there are some drawbacks to this, right? If you're standing on one shore and you need to get to the other shore and the ferry's over there, kind of a problem, right? So you have to wait till it comes back, then you pack your stuff on the ferry, you go back and forth and so forth, right? So the natural kind of solution to this was to find a way that we could have constant flow of information, constant travel back and forth across water, right? So we create bridges, right? Earliest kind of bridges that we create are something like this, right? We kind of create a way to literally get ourselves across this gap to the other shore. Unfortunately, not necessarily always the smoothest or most stable way to make that crossing. In fact, sometimes can be downright scary. So early, again, in human engineering history, we decided to take this basic concept, but to start firming it up, right? So create a more stable way to have this passage to move ourselves across from one shore to the other, right? So we start to have a more frequent kind of easy flow back and forth. So it's a little less scary now. We're getting a little bit more stability, right? As we advance, we can get sort of greater distances. We can kind of tackle stronger challenges. This is northern Portugal. This is around 14th century, and this bridge is still in use today. Right? So we're finding ways to get better at creating this solid, approachable way to move people back and forth across distances. And at the same time, as you can imagine on a bridge like this in the 14th century, we're starting to open up commerce with this as well, right? So we can now bring our goods to market. We're not limited to just being able to sell our goods in the towns near us, or have to go miles and miles upstream and come back the other side. We can now start to use this technology and this free flow of transit to bring people and goods back and forth as well. That continues to advance technologically, of course. This is the Iron Bridge in Shropshire in England. This was the first cast iron bridge in the world in the 17th century, right? So as we continue to reap the benefits of having this free flow of transit and commerce, it drives our technological innovations, right? So we can develop new technologies to do it better and at greater scale. Ultimately, that's continued to lead up into the 20th century. This is a highway bridge out in Western Australia. I spent some time in Australia, and has anybody ever seen these kind of land trains? These big 18-wheeler trucks that they rig together one after another. You can have 4, 5, or 6 of these traveling in these vast kind of convoys across the huge expanses of the outback and across the distance in Australia. And you get to these bridges where you're basically having a rail bridge with cars, right? So this common approach of building this foundation, creating a way to flow back and forth has continued really critically even to today. The challenge that we face then, though, is we've now created the avenue for the traffic to move, and we end up with this sort of thing, right? Anyone recognize this view? West Coast people here? Bay Bridge, yeah. Rush hour, Oakland to San Francisco. Right, so we've created this incentive to kind of move value and move people and move ideas, but we can hit limits if we just set it up and we walk away, right? Because we've created capacity, the demand has come with it, and now we're saying, well, what do we do, right? How do we get better at that? So that's led us to kind of the latest generation of technology in sort of crossing expanses. Anyone know what this one is? Huh? It's the Orion Bridge between Denmark and Sweden, right? It's over 5 kilometers long, okay? Carries both automotive and rail traffic, is both a bridge and a tunnel, it's in and out. But most importantly, this and other kind of smart bridges, right, sort of smart bridges, they're building on the notion of how can we be more intelligent and not just give you this facility, right? So they've built incredible amount of sensors and data into the structures themselves. They're simultaneously monitoring all kinds of factors, weather, environmental stresses, traffic. We have now the ability to do things like rearrange lanes, so you have more lanes open in the morning in one direction and more lanes in the afternoon in another direction. So we're collecting data and we're making decisions on how to most effectively allow this flow of people and commerce across these traffic chasms, right? So great example through human history now of finding this challenge and then incrementally figuring out ways that we can build on that to accomplish our goals, right? So let's talk about that a little bit across these, the notion of scale and stages, right? So we have basic of, sort of polling across, getting, basic one at a time kind of transit across the thing. We get to the basic kind of loose structural bridge where we're suddenly able to go at any given time, but there are restrictions on the volume of that. We go up to the basic pedestal bridges and these kind of notion of highway bridges where we have enough stability and we can start to move things back and forth, but we're still relatively limited in the amount of flow that can go across there. So we add more lanes and we expand the distances that we can stretch until finally we get to this notion of really being goal-driven in the architecture here, where we can say, how do we optimize for weather conditions, or how do we optimize for traffic, or other kinds of conditions like this. One thing to bear in mind, if you look through this entire history too, is we don't throw out everything that we had done before, right? We're really building on the previous generations of technology and retaining those key characteristics, right? So you still have, even in the most modern structures, you still have this basic foundation. You need those strong pillars that are going to be driven down deep into the soil. You need that nice strong platform, the deck, whether it's for cars or trains, you're still going to be moving things across that. You're building each successive generation, retaining those key characteristics as you go, right? So thank you, that's my keynote. Thanks for coming to the Bridge Engineering Convention. No, it's the DevOps Convention. I would love to go to this, by the way. I read a lot about bridges in the last week or two. So what does this have to do with DevOps? All right, so it's a pretty obvious metaphor, perhaps. But let me kind of take you through it. Really for us, this is what Derek was getting at, is we really stand on two opposite shores, right? We have our ideas as businesses, the value that we express in the creativity of our teams, and that needs to be brought to market. Anything in between that is potentially waste. So really for us, what DevOps is all about is creating that way to most smoothly and most appropriately and most rapidly to bring that value from you and your organizations to your market, to the customers, right? So it's absolutely no different than that notion of a farmer bringing his goods to market across that bridge in Portugal in the 14th century, right? So let's take a look at at kind of the stages and how that works. So kind of earliest stage, when I was starting software, when I was starting in this industry, we would do a major release every 18, maybe 24 months. You were burning CDs or DVDs, right? And so you were packing a lot of work and value into that one object, right? And then you're physically shipping that off to your customers. They install that on in their environment. They start using it, and then it starts all over again. We start gathering up that content. So really quite similar to getting on a ferry, right? Pack all that stuff on a ferry, depart the shore, row across or haul yourself across, unpack it, and then go back and start it all over again. The challenge here is we lack that feedback loop, right? We have to wait, we send that out into the world, we gather feedback, and then we have to start all over again. It's not really well suited to iterative process. It also doesn't give a lot of opportunity to respond if there's a problem, right? If we're building software bits and we're burning them physically onto a CD and shipping them, or we're making some sort of big release, if we have a problem or we want to make enhancements, it makes it much more difficult to do that, right? So what we want to do, in the same way that the leap from going from a ferry to even the most basic bridge is you're starting to get these basic needs of connecting development and operations, right? How do we more smoothly allow that value to go to the customers and back and forth in this feedback loop? So that's this kind of first stage. And that's where we're really focusing on those dev and ops needs. What's that foundation? What's the basic architecture of allowing that to move smoothly back and forth? Okay. Next stage, now that we've gotten that basic process, we're similar to in the bridge where we now have maybe this one lane, and you still get kind of traffic, and you say, well, how do we now allow more people and more flow back and forth? Well, how do you do that in the bridge world? You kind of add more lanes, right? So you're expanding your throughput, and you're finding a way to scale that same solution more broadly across your organization, enterprise. So that's where in DevOps we see this notion of enterprise scalability, right? So you're building on top of that foundation of dev and ops needs with this ability to really scale it up. Finally, we get to that sort of notion of that smart bridge, right? Where we're saying, it's not sufficient to just create the avenue for bringing that value to your customers. You need to understand, how is the process working? How can we optimize that process? What's the benefit that it's getting to my customers so I can take that knowledge back into market and I can adjust what I'm doing appropriately so that it's more and more value. So really kind of following fairly closely along that same line. And it actually works exactly the same as the architectural similarities, right? So in the same way that with the bridges, we were building on the prior generation, and we were enhancing those attributes and adopting them for subsequent generations. Same thing in DevOps, right? So the bridge has its strong foundation. It doesn't matter what kind of bridge you need. If you don't have that strong foundation, the rest above it is going to collapse. Same thing in DevOps. If you're not starting with that fundamental foundation of getting dev and ops to work together and those processes and automating them, you're not going to be successful. When you get up to the throughput, right, the bridge, you're adding more lanes. Same thing with DevOps. You need to be able to scale it to be able to take advantage of that foundation that you've laid throughout your organization. It's insufficient unless you're in a really tiny team with a small org to be satisfied with just that narrow pathway to market. And then finally, the equivalent of the monitoring the bridges comes to this notion of intelligence and insight, right? Now, I will kind of make this caveat that if you come out here to the Charles River and you look at Longfellow Bridge, then you move over here to the harbor where you get the Zakim Bridge that's going a bigger distance and it's carrying the major interstate freeway. And then you get to the Orison Bridge that's in Sweden and Denmark. Then you come all the way back to one of the islands that I like to visit up in Maine where there still is a car ferry, right? The reason we still have all of those is because not every situation calls for the exact same solution, right? So we're not necessarily going to invest in all of the sort of same incredibly high-end environmental monitoring systems when we don't need it, right? So it's important for engineers in the bridge world, and it's important for us as leaders in the DevOps world to understand that difference. So in the same way that you have different geography and weather conditions and traffic loads and requirements, we have the same thing in enterprises, right? So what's the size of your enterprise? What's the configuration of your team? How similar or dissimilar are the technology stacks that you have? What's your delivery mechanism, right? Derek mentioned that not all of our customers would necessarily want changes delivered to production every 17 seconds, right? So understanding the needs allows you to adjust your program to satisfy the needs that you have in your organization, right? Both technically and from a customer and business value perspective. Okay. So where do we fit in? So XebiaLabs, importantly, is able to work with you at all of these different stages, right? And like a country that's going to have all of these different types of bridges within its internal, sort of geography, chances are in your organization you're going to have teams that span the spectrum of these needs in different parts of the solution. So one of the keys to us as we plan our platform is how can we continue to add value for organizations that are experiencing the efforts at all of these different levels, right? And in the same way, you can think about this difference in bridges. We have a lot of conversation in the US right now about infrastructure, right? And the importance of keeping that infrastructure up to date and investing in that. You can't continue to just build a bridge and walk away and never come back to it. Right? You have to continually maintain and make sure that that infrastructure is kept up to date. So we don't see this as sort of you're done with the DevOps stage and then you move to the enterprise stage and you never look back. We're continually kind of looking to say, how can we make that, that foundation stronger by adding value there based on your feedback? On the enterprise piece, how can we add value there to make that more stable and so on all the way up to the top. So that's kind of where we see XebiaLabs, right, is this combination of consulting engineering firm, right, and tool provider and maintenance company that can work with you to solve the needs that you're going to have in your organization across lots of different cases that require lots of different types of solutions. But at the end of the day, the value is exactly the same. How can you shorten that gap between the idea that you have and delivering that value to your customers, right, getting that to market faster? Okay. So what I like to do now is, so we're going to pivot and talk a little bit more specifically about the products. So I'm part of the product team, and we're really lucky to have a number of folks from the product organization here with us today. What I'd like to do is kind of go through each of these stages, and we'll talk about what are some of the characteristics at those stages, what are things that you could be focused on in your organization that are challenges, and then we'll take a look at some specific things that are in the XebiaLabs platform that help you be more successful as you go through those. Some of what we're going to talk about is already in the product today, but some of what we're going to talk about is coming soon or brand new features as well. Okay? So we'll kind of go through this, we'll take a tour, and then I'm going to finish up with a sneak peek at some new technology that we're developing, a brand new project that's really going to help, particularly up at this top end. Okay? Great. One more sip of water and we'll get started. So, you're a ferry boat, right? You're probably in this kind of waterfall mode because you're thinking about software in more of a batch way, right? It's perfectly fine in some cases, right? So again, when I go to Maine and I'm taking that ferry across that small island, that's perfectly fine. It's a seasonal business. We don't have that volume of traffic, and for certain kind of projects, especially surprisingly smaller projects, this approach tends to work perfectly fine, right? You can kind of batch things up. You are doing those releases. You pretty much know what you're building from scratch, so that continuous feedback loop may not be so important at the beginning. I would say that continuous integration is probably something that you'd want to consider no matter what stage you're at. Even in the small stage, that's kind of a core to what we believe is required to be successful in software delivery. But you could be experiencing some of these attributes and still be getting by just fine. But chances are your own success is going to force that solution to no longer be satisfactory, right? So that's a great time to start engaging with us, right? Even if it's just a team within your organization, and they happen to be there, and other parts of your organization are more advanced in their kind of DevOps initiatives, have those teams still engage with us anyway, right? Even if they're not particularly ready to be doing this sort of CD-driven, high volume, high turnaround feedback thing, it's a good time to start having those conversations to understand how can we start laying the groundwork, right? So it's the equivalent in the ferry world of thinking, where do I want to position myself on the shore? Looking for the shortest crossing and what's good geographical features that we could kind of, for the future, think about where's a good spot to build this bridge, okay? And finally, one of the benefits that I like at this stage is you've got lots of opportunity to have really dramatic impact with your initiatives at this phase, right? I'm a runner, and so I do a lot of yoga to try to get the kinks out of running. And my the yoga instructor says, "You're blessed with the gift of stiffness." Like, But her point is, I'm so bad at yoga that every little improvement that I make can be really dramatic, right? So if you're really starting at these early stages, it's a great opportunity for you to get these sort of quick wins and really viscerally have the teams feel the impact that those changes can have, right? So don't despair. This is an absolutely fine place to be, but it's a great opportunity to start talking to us, okay? So now we'll get into your more traditional kind of CD-type organization. So we're at this sort of software release bridge stage now, right? So you're really thinking about having this basic foundation of dev and ops working together to kind of have a much more smooth exchange of value between your organization and your customers. So you're probably doing continuous integration at this point. It's key for getting those changes into your production process. Chances are you're more team level oriented, both in your tools and your processes. We often see this either in organizations that came together through acquisitions, and different teams might be operating at different maturity levels, or where teams have been historically more independent because of the types of business units that they serve, right? So you may have different levels of this throughout your organization, but within that team, you might be doing some of this, this continuous delivery kind of work, but it hasn't been standard across the enterprise, right? You don't have that really high volume ability to standardize this broadly. Chances are, the tech stacks that you're working with are also relatively homogeneous at this stage, right? You have your kind of standard stack, you have your standard technologies that you use for project after project, so you can kind of get by with these processes that you've developed over the time, right? So what's important at this stage? Well, if you're just in this stage or you're just starting out and coming into this stage, think about the bridge, right? What was the difference between that rope bridge, the swinging rope bridge in the jungle, and kind of this 14th century bridge, right? Was that solid foundation. And that's the most important key at this stage, is setting up those processes that are going to allow you to build all of the future benefit on top of it. So what we see in talking to our customers and through our experience over the years of doing this is it really comes down to these factors. And Derek touched on repeatability in his comments at the beginning. But it's automation, right? Can I do the same thing over and over again with the expectation that it's going to be able to be done in an unattended way? Because that's going to be required for increasing speed. If I have a reliance on too many manual participants in that process, how am I going to make that faster and faster? Can I do it the same consistently day in and day out? And ultimately, am I able to increase the speed of that over time? So this will really do wonders for getting success at the team level. So let's take a look at a couple of things that are part of the XebiaLabs platform that are focused on this, and then we'll have a little bit of a conversation about some real-world examples. So first, we've got a couple of reports that are really key in the product. So one that I love to point folks to is the automation report. So this is an Excel release, and it's looking at what percentage of your releases are automated versus manual. Okay? And what you can see as you put your actual process through these tools is you can really see a direct correlation between automation and release duration, right? So the more you automate, you can see the duration of your releases going down, right? Lower automation, longer releases. So this gives you a good way to measure where you're starting from, but it also gives you a good way to make the case internally. I know we have a session this afternoon on making the ROI case for DevOps. These kinds of reports can be really valuable for that, because you can have tangible evidence that says, yeah, by doing automation, we're going to get an improvement here. We also have the release value stream. That's another report here where you can get a little bit even more specific data about where are some of your bottlenecks. So you can start to look for those opportunities to automate that process. Another key part is the very model itself that XebiaLabs platform is built on. You know, if your goal is to have an automatable, repeatable, high-speed process, it's difficult if you're starting from scratch every time. So imagine if I was making a bridge, and as soon as I walked across that bridge, I tore it down behind me. And then I waited until the next time I had to get across, and I built the bridge again, and I walked across the bridge, and then I tore it down behind me, right? It would be ridiculous. But in a lot of cases where folks rely on scripting, that's essentially what they're doing. They're defining this one-time, document, this process that's going to give them this path to the release. By having a model, you're creating a definition of what it is that you're releasing and your environments or your model for what the release flow looks like, and you're able to leverage that again and again, right? So that reuse is really important based on the model. And then finally, another feature that's been a big focus in the last couple of releases, continuing in the future, we're adding on to this, but it's the ability to represent those processes and that model as a code artifact, right? So if you want to increase the ability of your organization to do this at speed, empowering your developers to actually model their own process in code, which is something they're familiar with anyway, is a huge benefit. And then that code artifact can be just another product of their day-to-day life, right? They're using the IDE that they're familiar with. They're using the processes that they're familiar with peer code review. They're checking those into source code control, right? And you're going to get much faster adoption of the process by empowering your developers to do that sort of thing. Right. Then finally, for that solid foundation, the next most key for that is having the platform that's going to allow you to build whatever you come across, right? So again, back to the bridge, you might have this a rocky shore on one side and soft sand on the other side. You have to be able to accommodate for all of those different barriers that you're going to be building that on top of. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time focusing on here at XebiaLabs is how do we give you the support and the integration with all of the components of that platform. So absolutely go from what we would consider more the classic enterprise environments, your Java and your .NET. Derek mentioned CompuWare. We've done a couple of really terrific webinars with them. You can check the recordings out on our website. But really thinking about how do we leverage environments, these kind of mixed platform environments where we do have mainframe components and traditional middleware all the way up to what we'd consider sort of more modern cloud container environments. We have a session this afternoon. Tom Laro from KeyBank is going to be talking about OpenShift and what the work that they've been doing in that platform there. We mentioned containers and public cloud services. We've invested really quite heavily, as long as I've been with the company, to always be looking at how is this platform landscape shifting and how can we make it easier for you to take advantage of that and deploy it. So AWS, lots of new value coming there. Microsoft Azure support in the recent 7.0 release, Docker, Kubernetes, other container platform technologies as well. Right? So you want to make sure that the platform, the vendor that you're working with, gives you this broad platform support so that once you start to automate, you don't have to go back and re-architect each time. Right? So just to kind of give a little bit more kind of customer perspective at the end of each of these, I'd like to invite up a couple of colleagues who can just give us a little bit of sense of what they see in the field. So Sunil is sitting where? Oh, he's standing way in the back. So I'll invite Sunil up. Our customer success team is really critical to our business. We don't want to just give you a bunch of software and then walk away. But we want to work with you and engage with you to make sure that you are being successful as you're doing these early projects. So, Sunil, you can come on over here, I guess. So we're doing the mic here, right? Yeah. There you go. Yeah. So we don't have the handheld mic, so you could just sort of stand here and make sure everybody can see you.
I can't compete with your bridge analogy, so all my notes are worthless.
He's quickly like, oh, I need a metaphor, okay? There's different kinds of llamas. All right.
Goats.
So there are billy goats, and there's little goats, and there are dwarf goats, Nigerian dwarf goats. Tell us kind of, you're out there, you're working with a lot of organizations that are getting started on this journey. So how about this notion of automation? So what are some of the things that people typically look at to automate? What do they experience in those early stages as they're just trying to get this started?
I think the hardest thing really is to figure out what to automate, right? So our approach really, can you guys hear me? Sorry, I'm usually very loud. The approach we've always taken is figure out what you want to automate, and the way to do that really is pick 1 to 3 of your highest visibility applications. And the reason we say that is because those apps are usually what your pain points are, right? They might include all the technologies that you touch, whether it's database, changes that you're trying to make, web tier changes, of course, might be messaging tier changes, sometimes even infrastructure, right? But pick 1 to 3 of your highest visibility applications and automate that. That's that first type of bridge that Tim was talking about that has, the few planks. It might be a little rickety, but it is that bridge that you're going to start iterating on. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. And so the other part we talked about was the model, right? So that gives organizations a good foundation to represent their process and build on. When you start working with a new customer, when you go into a new organization, how do you approach that? How do you start creating that model? How do you think about understanding those environments that they're going to be managing with software?
So the whole model-driven approach is, I think most companies already kind of practice that, but what ends up happening is this whole gloat around scripting and programming. And the idea behind really using a model-driven approach is you end up with better standardization. You talked a little bit about improved automation and reliability, right? If you keep that in mind and you use the model-based approach, you are automatically building that automation and reliability into the whole system, right? So a good example actually is Digital Globe, and Tony Wilmer is here. He's going to talk a little bit about how they build reliability into their pipeline. They went from almost 300 plus Jenkins jobs to around 30 plus Jenkins jobs. That's, a tenth. Think about the amount of maintenance that you reduced, the ROI behind that, right? The amount of money that you're saving when you're using that approach. So, it's really all about reliability and maintenance and how much time do you really want to spend scripting as opposed to being able to standardize your pipeline and provide the visibility to the entire enterprise.
Yeah, and that notion of maintaining scripts is something that I think folks often overlook, right?
Yep.
You think about writing them, but not necessarily maintaining them. We did a webinar with Nicole Forsgren from Dora maybe a month ago or so, and in it, she was looking at statistics that were reflective of high-performing DevOps organizations. And one that was really important to me that I found to be really powerful was the amount of time that developers spent building new features, new feature development versus maintenance, technical debt, and infrastructure code. In the high-performing DevOps organizations, it's a dramatically larger percentage. I can't remember the percentage, but significantly larger because they're not spending their time doing this. Yeah. So if you're going out and through the effort of hiring great developers and training them to work in your organization to bring value to your customers, you don't want them maintaining scripts or doing that kind of infrastructure thing. You want them delivering net new value through feature development to the customers.
Exactly. Well, it's typical, right? Developers will always say, yeah, we can do it, and we'll write a bunch of scripts to get stuff done. It's easy to do that as a developer. But when you start translating that to the organization and you have people at all layers, all stages of the organization, it's hard for a manager, right? Or even a technical team lead might be able to go into Jenkins and start looking, poking around. But the minute you start exposing that to the rest of the organization, it's almost absolutely necessary to have data and metrics and stuff that easily consumable, right? Not everybody's a programmer.
And how about challenges? So, we know that there's lots of different organizations and teams within organizations that are at different stages. So if there was a team or an organization that was kind of at this early stage and you're thinking about automation and creating these kind of basics of the dev needs and the ops needs, what are some of the challenges that they might face or things to watch out for, gotchas, that from your experience working with customers that are doing this?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that people forget when they're starting their DevOps transformation or Agile transformation, whichever it may be, right? In this case, we're talking about DevOps, is really managing that change. How do you disseminate the information that you're gathering during your transformation, right? And what most people lack is the visibility. So I'm a developer or I'm a technical team lead just starting off the transformation. What do I need to do to let my executives know what's going on? What kind of data points am I gathering to start, showing what's being done across the organization? And in a lot of cases, people kind of forget that, right? It's all what I call DevOps change management. It's got nothing to do with ticketing systems or how you process your work. It's really about information gathering and making sure that the executives are well notified, right? And that information is going not only up the chain, but down the chain. All the development teams want to know how far are we in the pipeline, what features have been added so that now we can start deploying Docker containers, or that we're now available to deploy to Azure or to AWS, right? Those kind of things that need to be known across the organization.
Great. And I think that was a little bit of a plug for Sunil's session this afternoon.
I haven't finished.
So what's your session?
So my session is really about metrics, right? Intelligence, and really being what I call DevOps Smart, right? If you're smart about what you're gathering, the data that you're gathering, you'll be a whole lot more prepared to figure out where your inefficiencies are in your pipeline and start plugging those inefficiencies, right? Full automation. You want to get to 100% at some point. How do you get there without data, right? So sensors, data, metrics, intelligence, smart water, smart.
Good. Well, go to the session. Thanks so much, Sunil. So that's great. So you brought us kind of to this this solid foundation. We've got stone pillars for our bridge, a good solid foundation built on the concepts of automation, repeatability, platform stability, so we can cross whatever kind of challenges we have. So the next stage then is to figure, well, how do we really open up the throughput there, right? So we've got this solid foundation. Now, how do we scale it up? How do we ramp it up, right? This is probably where many of you are sitting right now in your organizations. This is an area where we tend to do a lot of work, where a lot of our customers are, where you might have had some successes in some individual teams, but the challenge now is how do you really open up and maximize that learning and standardize it across the organization? An organization isn't just a loose confederation of individual software teams doing single projects in isolation. They have to work together, and they become really important standards as we get into larger enterprises as well, with things like compliance and risk. So some of the characteristics, you basically have this foundation of CD probably, right? Using the things that Sunil was just talking about, you're getting that throughput. But you're probably getting a more mixed technology stack, right? You probably have pockets of teams that are doing, more traditional web middleware development. Some might be doing more cutting-edge things. You might have still, mainframe mixed in with things. But all of these platforms are eventually having to come together in a certain way as well and build your processes around them. The team distribution becomes important here too. You might have teams that are geographically distributed, but also organizationally distributed. Right? You don't necessarily have one team that's doing the entire full stack of your application. You might have one team that does front-end and mobile apps, another team that does middleware or back-end processing apps. And these organizations all have to work together. And if you don't have consistent processes for that, then all the velocity and improvements in that throughput that each individual team has is not going to be able to come together. Right?
Yeah. Quick question. When we started this process a few years back, it's a technology product. It has really not a lot of business value. And stuff. And I think what we noticed is that when we started including the DevOps practices, the incorporation of the automation into the actual business programs, we started getting more traction, more support, and things like that. And I think people start seeing more value. Is that what you guys see as well? And if you bring it as a technology product, it's kind of
Yeah. So this is a great point. So what Vito said, for those who might not have heard, is what they were seeing in their early experience was, by talking about this as not just a technology solution, but a business solution, right? It's about bringing that business value, and the participants are broader than just those narrow technical teams, right? It's not just development teams. That really increased the success. And I definitely see that in terms of scaling across the enterprise, right? We see organizations where tying DevOps initiatives to broader business initiatives can have a real value, right? So if you're doing an organization-wide change to deal with a certain financial regulation or some sort of industry-wide practice, that has to touch on a bunch of teams within the organization, right? Because it's not an individual team. And by tying it to that business transformation, it gives you an opportunity to introduce these efficiencies in the software process, right?
And we actually do that with all of our products. So it's gotten the institutional support we needed. So we're seeing a lot more momentum in terms of onboarding products or projects.
So anyone in this situation at the break, Dr. Vito? And we're doing a webinar with you, I think, coming up at some point soon too. So that'll be a great opportunity to folks to hear a little bit more about that story. So it's a great point. Compliance and security and risk, this starts to get to that notion too, is that there's more to the process of delivering value to customers through software than just the bits themselves, right? There's all of that stuff that goes around it, which is how do we make sure that it's secure, that we're not opening ourselves up to software created vulnerabilities? How are we being compliant to regulations, and how can we show who did what and when, so that when we have to address those regulatory issues, that we can. And if you have a whole bunch of different organizations, teams in your organization using different techniques and different practices, getting to those answers can be quite difficult. Imagine the poor audit person who has to figure out compliancy to certain development standards when every single team uses a different process with a different stack of tools to build their product. So the needs of non-technical software groups become really important if you're going to scale throughout the enterprise as well. So what do we do at that stage? Well, we focus on this through features in the products that are going to allow you to do that organizational scale. So organizing the instances and the information in your product, we'll take a look at that in a minute. We want to make sure that you can scale with the talents and the abilities of the people in your organization, right? You might have some pockets of highly technical people, you might have some pockets of less technical people, and you might have some pockets of people who are in the process, as Vito mentioned, who might not even be technical participants, right? So we want to be able to support these dual modes of operating that have both technical and less technical participants. And then we want to make sure that everyone can work together and collaborate more efficiently, especially as you're stretching across geography and teams and so forth. So let's take a look at a couple of specific features. This got cut off. Well, you can kind of see it on that side. So XL Release, we've added a really powerful system of creating folders, right? And so folders sounds kind of boring because it's an operating system thing that we take for granted. But it's a really powerful notion. Rather than saying that you have to define one project and it has one set of attributes and dependencies, you can create a really complex structure that represents whatever you want it to represent in your organization. Some might organize folders based on geographic distribution of the teams. Some might organize your content based on the applications that they're building. You could create folders that represent complex relationships between projects, microservices architectures, and the like. And by doing this, you're making it much easier to scale, because now when a developer logs in, they're not seeing all 600 releases that are happening. They're only seeing the ones that are relevant to them and their organization, right? So simple concept applied smartly at scale allows for a much more, a better organized process. Another thing that's important throughout our products is this notion of tagging, a super flexible way to associate bits of information with all kinds of things. It could be releases, it could be deployments, it could be individual tasks within a release. This allows us to have a relationship exist between parts of our development process that aren't hard relationships, right? So it's not, you're not restricted to doing master and sub-releases. You can have a whole sequence of independent releases being performed by different teams in different parts of the organization, but organizationally you can view them all together through efficient use of tagging. And with those tags, you can filter all different kinds of views throughout the products. So if you want to go to the release overview screen and see the progress of a bunch of related releases, you can use tags to filter that, or table views or other reports. Right? The automation report that I pointed out before, that could be filtered by tag. So you could see what parts of your organization are having better success at automating versus other parts of the organization that still need to improve that a bit. Okay? Communicating at scale, really fundamentally important. If folks don't know what other people are doing on their team and in the organization, they're really going to struggle to work together. And the way different developers and different technical folks work together is changing constantly over time. So on the left, we've got HipChat. Any HipChat Slack users? Right, so if you're not really familiar with it, watch your developers, because chances are they're using these tools. These collaborative tools are really powerful, and they're where your developers are living. So if you don't have a tool that can interact with those, you can't go to where your developers are, so it's difficult for you to have them all on the same page. So with support for collaboration tools, we can push notifications. Developers can interact with our tools from within those. As well as the traditional methods of notification that we do around email. That's continued to evolve as well in the product. The 7.0 release that I'll talk about at the end, this is a major component of it, is improving the way that we can collaborate and communicate leveraging email. Another great feature that I love, that's a bit of a sleeper, is this notion of watchers. So does anybody use Confluence or Wiki where you can watch pages? Right? So we now have the ability to do that down to individual task levels in a release. Right? So if I'm interested in specific things, like I know that this one part of the process is typically problematic and I get called in the middle of the night, I can watch that so I can be notified if there's problems with that. Or maybe I know that there's a piece that other members of my team need to pay attention to. I can assign them as watchers to a specific category of tasks. Right? So it's a really great way to focus in and filter the sort of signal to noise problems that you can sometimes have with these massive release cycles, and really let you focus in on the information that's most important to you and your team. Obviously, scalability is important. The XL platform is architected to allow you to really spread no matter how your organization grows, whether this is across multiple teams and multiple organizations, having physical environments configured and able to work together, or more organizationally with things like folders. This idea of being able to scale in whichever direction is appropriate for you is part of our architecture as well. Beyond that, we're adding new features in the future. You'll get a little sneak peek of this this afternoon in Jason's session. He'll be talking about that in a minute, where we're looking at how can we improve that even within the product. So complex microservices architectures is a great example of that. And how do we see what's happening with all of those different releases that might be happening not only by different teams, but in different parts of the world and different servers and different environments. Okay? And then finally, speaking of different parts of the world, our satellite technology in XL Deploy is really important for this, for allowing you to deploy an application in a cluster that might be across the world, right, in completely separate data centers. Right? Great ability to improve the efficiency and performance of these really complex deployments. So again, as we scale, we want to make sure that your organization can scale, but also the technology that's doing the delivery and the actual deployments can scale as well. Okay? So, speaking of Jason, to give a little bit of context and customer experience on this, I'm going to invite Jason to come up and join me. The reason I wanted to hear from Jason is Jason spent a good part of his career doing DevOps at Nike, and I think this is a good example of an organization that has gone through a number of these transformations. A customer that we work with very closely that's faced some of these challenges of how do you scale across the enterprise. So tell me a little bit about that.
Sure.
What are big distributed teams like, and what's your experience kind of there?
Yeah, so you touched on a lot of great points here, Tim, that we ran into at Nike. But the one that really resonated with me the most, I think, was that this is the stage where, as a company, you're learning. That's the number one priority, and you need to facilitate that within your teams as much as possible. So you need to do that in a way, though, that lets these teams, or lets the business users understand what's actually happening with the business and what's happening with their delivery and what's going on. So I think that for us at Nike, that was the biggest challenge that we faced, was trying to, as we decentralized our engineering teams, as we sort of minimized the role of the release management team to be the central organization function within our delivery process, and teams were delivering themselves, that the business portfolio owners of the entire product line were able to still understand what was happening, what features were going out when, what releases were at risk, and how we managed that. That was probably our number one challenge.
And as you had this sort of decentralization happening, were there still certain things that had to be centralized that were common and shared?
There were.
Were there compliance or security issues or things like that might have crossed it?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we found is that that we were able to design a delivery process that was consistent across all of our teams, but abstracted away the complexity of the implementation. So one team might be using Docker and AWS, another team might be using our legacy Java stack deployed in our own data center. And we followed a consistent release process that we all looked at that included these requirements for our compliancy teams. And XL Release actually gives you a really great way to do that, abstracting away this kind of dual mode that you were talking about, the implementation from what business users see as far as the state of the delivery.
And this notion, too, of having a standard model that represents a common release flow, but that can still be customized, right? So that individual teams or individual developers can still customize and tailor that for their own unique situation, adding new tasks or kind of changing phases.
Yeah. But still meeting that kind of centrally planned and corporate governance requirements of the delivery model.
Right, great. So session today, you're doing another session, so tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah, so this afternoon I'll be exploring in a lot of detail this phase that Tim's talking about, and many of these types of issues that companies run into. So in addition to this kind of release at scale with lots of small independently distributed teams, we'll be looking at communication and how you can manage that across a lot of teams, because that becomes very complicated as well, especially as people are moving to Slack and HipChat and other areas of communication. And I hope this is a really interesting talk and an interactive session where we can talk about some of the challenges that you guys are facing and that we've seen in the marketplace, as well as some of the solutions that we have in the XL product suite.
Great. And Jason's a product manager on the team, so lots of great experience in hearing from customers, as well as his personal experience prior to joining our company at Nike. So catch Jason at the lunch break and in the hallways, as well as the session. So cool. Great.
Thank you,
thanks. All right. So here we are. We've made it all the way through. We've got a nice solid foundation. We've got nice big wide lanes. We can really put the traffic through. We're getting that value to our customers. So this last piece, though, is really that smart bridge, right? How do you get even smarter about what you're doing? And how do you know the impact that it's having for your customers? And on a sort of metacognitive level, how do you think about the thinking that you're doing? And how do you make yourself take the practice itself as something that you iterate on and you improve, right? Those continuous improvements. So that, to me, is sort of this equivalent of what's happening in smart bridges. It's drawing on data, it's drawing on performance improvement and sort of self-awareness. So you probably do have this basic foundation of enterprise-wide CD at this point. But things that are starting to become more important are things like self-service, right? You don't want to have bottlenecks in your organization of setting things up for developers or teams as they onboard. You want infrastructure that can be brought up and torn down as necessary in a highly automated or self-service fashion, right? You want to have this focus on continual improvement in your process itself. So being self-aware as an organization about where are your areas for improvement and your bottlenecks in your process, and you need data for that. You need to know how are things moving through the process and what are those key metrics that define success in DevOps so that you can find out where you can improve. Feedback becomes incredibly important. If we're putting all of this investment into creating a process that delivers value to our customers, but then we walk away and we just wait for some product manager to go and see if they like it, right? We're missing the opportunity to really respond to that. So you start at this phase to start to look at things like highly instrumented software and how can we use real-time telemetry in our software to actually feed our understanding of the value of the benefit that we're delivering to customers. And that's something that you can do in your engineering teams and in the product teams, is to build that into the process so you have that real-time feedback loop. And then finally, you're seeing the full kind of shift left of those last few things that get tacked on. We did a great webinar recently with Sonatype and with Gene talking about this importance of security specifically. I've spent a lot of time in software security myself, and it's shocking that this, to this very day, is still something that in many organizations just gets bolted on at the end. Like, all right, we're ready to ship. Oh, wait, we should maybe do a pen test, right? But the more of this that we can shift left and fully integrate into our process, the more successful we're going to be at finding and remediating problems early and cheaper, and making sure that it becomes part of our process in the future so you reduce the likelihood of that happening, right? So how do you do all of that? Well, first of all, you really need to think about being goal-driven, right? A lot of people start off and they're saying, well, we're just doing CD or we're just doing DevOps because that's what they told me we had to do. But you have to think about, well, what are the goals? Because how can you measure your success if you don't know what your goals are, right? Is it about reduction of cycle time? Is it about reduction of flaws or deficits in your software, right? So you need to understand what that goal is in the same way that the Orion Bridge had to understand, well, we do have a number of different goals. We need to move both rail traffic and automotive traffic. So we have to adjust that and figure out what data that we need to be able to accommodate those needs at the same time. If we didn't know what kinds of traffic was going over our bridge, we wouldn't know how to design the bridge, right? So understanding what your goals are is going to be key to driving this continual improvement, right? You need visibility into it. You need to be able to gather the statistics. You need to be able to gather the data. So you have to make sure that your tools do that. And that's something that we focus on really importantly here at XebiaLabs. Prediction and longitudinal analysis even starts to come into effect here, right? You need your systems to be able to know not only what the data means today and right now, but what does it mean in relation to historical performance, right? So understanding defects is okay, but it's much more powerful if you understand that as part of a trend. Right? Are you getting better? Are you getting worse? What's the change over time? And a longitudinal understanding requires, again, getting that data and understanding that information and having a process to periodically think about it. Right? So again, that notion of, what's the DevOps equivalent of metacognition? Thinking about thinking, right? Doing DevOps about doing DevOps, right? Thinking about that continual improvement in that process. Right? So let's take a look at a couple of things that I think are high value in this area that XebiaLabs has already. And then I'm going to finish with, if the live demo gods are in our favor, we'll flip over and I'll give you a quick look at a new project that we're working on. So first one for me that is really incredibly excited is this notion of risk awareness. Right? So over the years, we've been working with hundreds of organizations, helping them understand better ways to release their software. Of course, along the way, we've developed a pretty deep understanding about those telltale signs that there might be problems in the process. Okay? And it could be any number of things. It could be tasks failing, or phases needing to be repeated, or manual tasks that are overdue or nearly overdue, right? So what we've built into the platform is a way to analyze in real time all of the releases that are happening and assess them based on those risk factors and give them a score. We actually give a number from 0 to 100 that represents the risk of that release versus all of the others. Well, why is this important? It's important because a lot of your release managers and folks who are in the position of understanding what's happening in flight in an organization at any minute, they might have dozens or hundreds of software releases that they're paying attention to. So when I come in the morning and I'm one of those release managers, it's incredibly powerful for me to know, whoa, wait a minute, before you even get coffee, you might want to take a look at these 2 releases. The other ones are in pretty good shape, right? So by applying this notion of risk intelligence, it really helps organizations be able to put their effort where it's most needed, especially when you're operating at large scale. So the risk awareness comes up here. This is the pipeline view in XL Release. We also have dashboard tiles and a lot of enhancements to this coming in the future that's going to make that even more extensible and customizable, so you can bring your own notion of the types of things that might be more or less important in your organization, indicators of risk. Right? Speaking of dashboard tiles, this whole notion of reporting is key throughout the product. We talked a lot about auditability. That's a key part of the platform XebiaLabs as well, because we have the constant logging of all of the information that's happening, regardless of what system it is. You can have a single point of truth, a single point to gather that information, right? So while a typical XL release, for example, might be talking to dozens of different systems, everything from Jira to Jenkins to XL Deploy to Sonatype to to ServiceNow, an auditor or another part of that organization can come to a single place in XL Release and see what happened when and who did what. Right, so incredibly powerful way to consolidate the data. You've got a mountain of information, but you can't necessarily have to go and gather it everywhere at the same time. And then reporting is another example where we can really target the information that gets produced. So think about security. So you've got risk and security professionals in your organization that really need to know what's happening in your software releases, but they really don't need to know about everything that's happening in your software releases, right? So understanding what deployment was happening and what other gates were happening or what manual tasks were happening, they don't care. What they want to care about are like 5 things, and that's all. So with our platform, you can go in and you could tag, I mentioned tagging before, you could tag any specific set of tasks or releases throughout your entire environment, and a security risk professional could go to a dashboard and just see the tile that gives that information. So this is an example here. It's a simple task progress for security, right? So they know of all of the tasks in the release, the ones that I care about, we're halfway done with them, right? So really good, another good example of not only having a body of information, but narrowing it and tailoring it for the personas in a really important way. Okay? And finally, we're really excited to give you kind of the world's first. Is this the world's first kind of look at this in progress? So a new project we're working on that we're referring internally, at least at this point, as XL Insight. The key for us here was really about this idea of continual improvement and being goal-driven, right? I've already mentioned the importance of these 2 factors, but when I was out talking to lots of organizations and customers and hearing from you and talking to other professionals in the industry, a big challenge that we have is if I've set this goal for myself for cycle time reduction or quality improvement, it's very difficult for me to, A, go out and gather the required information from a bunch of different systems to get that insight, right? Because some of it might be in XL Release, but some of it might be in GitHub, and some of it might be in Jira. And so gathering all of that information in the first place can be challenging. But then we run the risk of being able to aggregate data, but not knowing what it means at the end of the day, right? So that's why we've been using this word insight, because it's not just about kind of gathering data, but it's about aligning that to goals so that you can have some insight into what the data actually means towards what you're trying to accomplish, okay? So let me bounce out of this. We'll switch over just to screen sharing. And I'll give you a quick peek here. OK. So we're going to have a quick kind of look here. At the beginning phase here, we're pulling data in from different sources. So as I mentioned before, XL Release gets a lot of information from lots of different sources through its plugin architecture. So we know when XL Release goes out and asks Jenkins to do something, we know that that happened, right? What we don't know is what's happening inside of that Jenkins job, right? We don't know all of the builds that are happening. When a developer does a check-in that starts that CI process, we can kind of experience that that happened through the task triggering XL Release, but we don't know that a commit actually happened and when it happened, right? So the first thing we need to do is go out and aggregate some data. So in this example, the insights that you're going to see here are coming from 3 different sources. They're coming from XL Release, coming from Jenkins, they're coming from GitHub. Right? But we have the ability to expand that palette of technologies over time. So we can pull in from additional technologies, so obviously candidates of Jira and automated testing tools and these sorts of things. But you could also create these same data collectors and aggregators. The second thing I want to point out is this notion of goal. Right? So instead of a typical kind of reporting dashboard, we're not telling you start with a project or start with a system. We're saying start with a goal. What is it that you're trying to do? You're trying to reduce cycle time or reduce lead time or improve release quality. And then what we're going to do is, based on our experience, we're going to understand what pieces of information are most relevant to helping you answer, have I accomplished that goal? Or how far along am I in that goal? So in this case, we've got reduced cycle time as a goal. And what XL Insight has done is created 3 different sections of information from those 3 different tools that's going to help us understand and answer that. So the top one was, sorry, go back up one more, was frequency and duration. Right? So if you're trying to reduce your cycle time, if you don't know how long things are happening and how frequently they're occurring, it's kind of hard to know if your cycle time is improving. Right? Next set would be failures. Right? So reducing your cycle time is important, but not if it comes at the expense of a great reduction in quality. So looking at that, you want to be on the lookout for potential problems there. And then finally, we're looking at actual project activity insights. So what's actually happening inside of the project, so I can look for spikes or problems, or I can understand the relationship from one system to the other. So I'll point out just a couple of things in these. First is this notion of insight in the tiles themselves and the information we're sharing, right? So what you don't see right off the bat is just a bunch of pie charts and bar charts that you have to figure out what exactly that means. What we're doing is we're pulling out actual information. So right up here, just in natural English, we're saying releases are becoming more frequent. Awesome, that's really good information. I didn't have to look at a chart and sort of interpret that. The system understands that based on our understanding of this. And releases are becoming shorter, great. But there might be some anomalies, right? So there was this one particular release that was unusually long, right? Now, I might want to drill into that to find out why that was long, and we provide you with the data that you can drill down into. But at the top level, just to have that insight and have that information quickly is really valuable, right? I can get top information, for example, like what's my average frequency. And I know that that's an improvement because it's going down 68% from what my previous average was, right? Activity insights, same sort of thing, right? We have some tiles that show some common, really important data. But again, we also provide all of the information if I wanted to drill down on it, right? So for example, here, what I'm seeing is activity from a number of different sources, releases, commits, pull requests, Jenkins jobs. I have the usual tools to zoom in and zoom out and look at the data and drill down in it. And now for me, as sort of a kind of agile person, I'd be looking at this and I'd be saying, all right, well, why is my activity kind of spiky like this, right? So if you're going with kind of a lean approach, you want to have fairly consistent activity levels. You don't want a lot of spikes because that could potentially suggest inefficiencies, right? So already I'm looking at this and I'm getting some ideas that I might want to drill down into. But what I'm also seeing here is that most of that is Jenkins jobs. So if I take that out, it looks a lot less spiky, right? So that could just mean that I'm getting better at my CI process, right? So we're both giving you the high-level insights that tell you the general trends in your performance, but we're also giving you all of the underlying data brought together in a way that you don't get in other tools to see the details behind it and the relationships between those numbers, okay? Lastly, we talked a lot about over time, right? This notion of longitudinal understanding. Down here in the task failure section, you got a couple of good examples of that, right? So failure by itself isn't necessarily a problem, right? Especially if we have a good high-performing DevOps organization, we can respond well to that failure, and we can have the time to recovery really minimal because we've built those good DevOps practices. But what's important to know is the failure rate change, right? So we're not just looking at a number of failures, but we want to see it over time. So we're really seeing a difference in has that changed over time? Not just the rate today of failures, but how is that relative longitudinally, okay? So that was a quick look at Insight. And we'll go back to the slides. So what do you think? Cool? Yes? You want it? You can't have it today because we're all here talking to you instead of back writing code. All right, so get ourselves towards the end here. I'm a little over time. So what I hope you've seen here, right, is as we've looked through this range of solutions, right, bear in mind there are different kinds of crossings. So there are different kinds of teams and different kinds of organizations. It doesn't mean that you have to always be one or the other to be more successful. It's understanding what the right mix and combination is. As long as you're building on that same solid foundation and delivering appropriate capabilities to your teams, you're going to be able to accommodate all those different kinds of crossings. And XebiaLabs, as I hope you've seen with some of the features in the platform and that you'll see through the other segments today, sessions today, from your peers. You know, we have ABN AMRO, we have Freedom Mortgage, we have Digital Globe that Sunil mentioned. All of you are here to share your stories about this journey with each other today. So really excited for you to do that. I promise the last kind of bridge metaphor is the thinking what's in the future. And of course, if our story is about bringing value to market, we always have to be thinking about how is that changing and what's evolving, right? So if I was the bridge engineer, I would be thinking things like, well, what do self-driving cars mean now, right? Do I need to understand the data and insights, not just from an impact of the weather conditions on the bridge, but the traffic, because now I have self-driving cars, and what does that mean to traffic patterns? Or maybe traffic patterns get reduced because now we're using package delivery drones and there's fewer 18-wheelers on the bridge, right? So no matter where you are in that cycle, if you're not constantly thinking about what's next and what's evolving, you're going to be caught off guard. So things for me, we know that containers and clouds have been revolutionary, but what about things like serverless, right? Or mesh apps, right? And server architectures, or we have lots of changes that might be coming with specialty types of software delivery, so big data or IoT, right? And how does that change what we need to build? Finally, we have changes in what the software will do over time, right? Think about machine learning and AI, where you have this constant, growth of the systems that you have to accommodate, right? So the notion of versioning changes, right? So I would definitely encourage you. I know you've got lots to do and lots to think about, but don't stop thinking about what's coming on the horizon and what will the experience of developing software look like, so that you're not caught off guard by it in the same way that your bridge designers don't want to be caught off guard. Finally, we do have our big announcement of the 7.0 launch today. So if you haven't seen the press release, congratulations to the teams for getting that launch out today. Definitely check it out. Some really incredible things in there. Important themes around communication, right? How do teams work together at scale? The risk features that you saw before. This dual mode functionality of mixing low code or no code parts of your team with code-centric parts of your team. A whole new user experience in the deployment workflow, and a wealth of increased capabilities around cloud and containers as well, right? So all of these together are really painting a powerful story about organizations working together, collaborating at scale, right? So really not just crossing that chasm, getting the value from one shore of the river to the other, from your ideation to value to customers, but doing it at scale and quickly, right? So enough bridges. I promise no more bridges for the rest of the day, but go out and enjoy the harbor. Thanks so much. We're going to take a break now. Yep.